Good afternoon, everyone. Today is the feast of St. James the Apostle. This is Christmas in July, right? July 25th. Today's a wonderful feast day, isn't it? Anytime that we celebrate an apostle, it tells us about the journey of faith of our Lord and those he has chosen, and a beautiful way how it continues on to this day to cultivate a people of faith. Today I'm beginning a series on the Holy Sacrament of Marriage. I think it's good for us always to talk about the sacraments, but I'm going to talk to you about this sacrament of Holy Matrimony, because this sacrament sometimes can be confused and it could be brushed aside. People may not opt to celebrate the sacraments. So do you remember the day that, of course, if you're going to be married and you're a Catholic, you get married in a Catholic parish that you belong. Usually the custom would be the girls' parish, right? And sometimes that could be the boys' parish, but not necessarily. Custom would be the girls' parish. It's just a tradition. Has nothing to do with church law, has nothing to do with anything in the scriptures. It's just one of those small t traditions. You know, we call the capital T traditions and we have a small t traditions. But let's not get into that, because I could spend an hour talking to you about what is apostolic tradition and what is custom. Capital T, apostolic tradition. Small t, custom. So a custom or a small t tradition is to be married at the bride's parish, but not necessarily. Just as long as Catholics are married by a priest in the celebration of a nuptial mass, or by a deacon in the celebration of a nuptial ceremony. And during this series, everyone, I'm going to bring you through step by step about what we understand and what we mean by all of these terms. Because they could be overwhelming to someone who is like 21, 25, who is coming into the parish office for the first time to set a date for their wedding and to talk to the priest, myself the pastor, or maybe a parochial vicar, an assistant pastor of a parish that you belong to. Or maybe in some cases, a permanent deacon who takes the initial interview and writes down all the necessary information. So I want to take you through step by step, talking about the different scenarios and the different situations that a couple preparing to celebrate the sacrament will experience as they come into the parish office. So the first thing that I hope that all Catholics understand, that it is necessary to be married within the context of a sacrament, the holy bond of matrimony. I'm going to say that again. I hope that all Catholics understand that it is absolutely necessary to be married within the context of a sacrament of holy matrimony, of this holy bond that God has created from the very beginning. It's part of divine law. It's part of the natural law, going way back from the book of Genesis, when God created our first parents. That union, that the man needed a woman, a helpmate, to be with him along the journey. And we can see how that is Christianized in the sacrament throughout the New Testament when Jesus went to the wedding feast of Cana in Galilee. So this is not just like, oh, you know, we're Catholics, so we just go to our church and get married. There's a whole theology of marriage. Do you know what I mean by that? There's a whole scriptural base. There's a whole base of divine law of matrimony. And it's important that all Catholics, in particular, understand that. Do you know someone who was not married by a priest or a deacon that is a Catholic? Why? Why did they not get married by a priest or a deacon? When I say married by, I'm talking about something very interesting. Married by, we use a common term. Were you married by a deacon or a priest in the Catholic Church? We call this, was that marriage witnessed by a deacon or a priest? Because technically speaking, the minister of the Sacrament of Matrimony is the bride and the groom. Yeah, they're the ministers because they minister the vows to one another. And the priest or the deacon stands as a witness on behalf of Christ and the church. Isn't that a nice understanding of it? So marriage, it's part of divine law. From the beginning, God created man and woman. And their purpose of the creation of man and woman, what is their primary purpose? The spiritual goods of marriage. That's something that we need to always talk about. The spiritual goods of marriage. Why do we have marriage? It's not just get a piece of paper and say, here, we're married now. That's why a lot of people just cohabitate. You know what they live together. Cohabitation. In the eyes of the gospel, in the eyes of the church, in the eyes of Christ, it's sinful to live together. It's not how the Creator intends. That God must be part of this union. Because we believe that God calls them to fall in love. It was by no coincidence that they met each other. They found each other. God allowed that to happen. Hello? God allowed them to find each other and fall in love for a purpose. We call that the spiritual goods of marriage. The purpose of why God called a couple to fall in love and to be one with each other in this beautiful vocation that we call matrimony, holy marriage. These spiritual goods, that it is to be exclusively only to them. Like they don't share this gift of marriage with other people. It's exclusive between one man and one woman. I guess we have to talk about that, right? Because that's not always the case. Especially when you have other people who follow other different ways of life, religions. I'm not going to say churches because there's only one church. That say, oh, multiple spouses are okay. It's not intended to be that way. Again, I'm going to bring you back to oneness. That's why even the couple themselves form the unity. It's supposed to be a unitive nature, indissoluble. So it's between them, that's a good of marriage, only them, the man and the woman. So it's not multiple people, it's only a man and a woman. And it's not the genders of a man and a man, or a woman and a woman. That does not constitute holy matrimony. That might be a union that the world has created, but it shouldn't use the word marriage, because that word comes from a Judeo-Christian philosophy and religion. We have to be very careful of words. Words are important, don't you think? And when words are scrambled, then everything's okay. Get the lights, let's go home. It's all over. Because we're making up our own rules as we go along. I want to know as a Catholic, I know I'm a priest and a Catholic. All my life I've been a Catholic. But before I was ordained, I want to know what the church teaches about marriage. Before I enter into that, if I had a vocation of marriage, I want to know what I'm getting into and what my religion believes about marriage. And do I understand it? Understanding is important, don't you think? I mean, we could disagree about things, but the more that we understand it, the more we learn about it, we have to let go and let God teach us what His intention is. Oh, that might be your intention, but that's not the intention of God. So I told you, marriage is part of divine law from the very beginning. And then it's Christianized in the sacrament by Christ, who went to the wedding feast of Cana in Galilee. Christ is the author of all the sacraments, don't you know? Christ is the one. What is a sacrament? It's an outward sign instituted by Christ to give grace. What is it again? A sacrament is an outward sign, something I could see, touch, taste, smell, hear. It's all based on our five senses, the theology of the body, the sacrament. It's an outward sign. Look at all the sacraments instituted by Christ. So we go in our scriptures and we find where they're instituted by Christ. And what's the purpose of the sacraments? To build up the body of Christ and to give grace. To give grace. What is grace? God's divine life in me. Right? We hear these terms, but it's always nice to review terms, don't you think? Because we don't always use them. And when we're in a situation or a conversation at home, when our children are not getting married by a priest, in other words, not getting married by Christ, because Christ is the celebrant of all the sacraments. He uses the physical being of a priest, as we all know, because we went through that course already before. But Christ is as the theologians of yesteryear call them, the primary agent. Christ is the celebrant in the economy of salvation. And it's Christ who calls. Just like I was called to the priesthood. I was called to the priesthood. Why did God choose me? It was part of His plan. He wanted to use me, my flesh, my five senses, my being, to bring about salvation. Thank you, Jesus. I'll do it. If you want me to, I'll do it. He calls men and women to the sacrament of matrimony, to the bond of a man and a woman coming together. Divine law. He calls them together to reflect who He is, love, and how that love is creative. Do you know God's love is creative? Look at creation. So the couple is to reflect the creative love of God, unity among themselves only. One man and one woman only. It's a creative act of God, His love. He calls them to that state. And that state calls to be a creative state. That's why men and women are to be procreative. That's another good. Do you understand the goods of marriage now? Unity, indissolubility. So we understand what unity is. One man, one woman, alone. That's it. Nobody else. Get out. It's just me and her. Her and me. That's it. Let's make that clear. Unitive. Indissoluble. What God has joined, no one must put asunder. Not put asunder, put asunder. Asunder. What God has joined, no one must divide, separate. Because separation is not part of God's plan. Fraction is not part of God's plan. See, sin does that. See, even with the church, what happened? One church, right? What happened? No. No. That's not how it's supposed to happen. But it does. Sin divides, grace unites. So the spiritual goods of marriage. Remember, it's not just personal. Marriage is part of God's plan. So all the married people out there, thank you for affecting my life. It's not your little world. Just like the priesthood is not my little priestly world. I go hide in a rectory somewhere. At the end of the day, I want to. But that's not my word to hide away. I'm supposed to be in the midst of everybody. Unitive. Indissolubility. Until death do us part. Now, the vocation of the priesthood and of marriage is no easy vocation. We all know that. In fact, no vocation is easy because God always challenges us. He knows what we're made of and He knows what we can do. But is the vocation truly from God? Or is it just puppy love? You know, people, puppy love. They're young, they fall in love, they think everything's going to be like a fairy tale. And they're married and they're faced with this, right? Same thing we tell the seminarians. It's not about being dressed up as a priest and putting on the fancy vestments and going out with the bells and the smells. Reality check, everybody. Reality check. Hey, listen, we tell the seminarians the same thing as we tell the young, impressionable couples the same thing. You're faced with challenges, and you need the grace of the sacrament, but you also need to be informed and educated. Remember, to understand, it's very important to understand the goods of marriage. Unitive, indissoluble, procreative. At a pre-Cana session, that's a seminar we give to engaged couples, I said, are you ready to accept if the week after marriage your spouse was hit by a car and is a paraplegic? 1 week after you're married. Can you say with all your heart, until death do us part? You'll need the grace of the sacrament. But you need to cooperate with the grace. Grace is just not a magic potion. You need to cooperate. Have you ever heard of this saying in theology? Grace builds on nature, but it doesn't destroy it. Think about that. Grace builds on nature, it doesn't destroy it. You are who you are. Your personality, your likes, your dislikes, your temperament doesn't leave you, right? Grace builds on nature, it doesn't destroy it. So don't think that, oh, I'm going to change him, he drinks too much. But when I marry him, he's not going to be drinking anymore. Hello? Grace builds on nature, it doesn't destroy it. You have to know that. You're not going to put a magic potion in his breakfast drink or in his Wheaties in the morning and he's going to be all better now. And vice versa. You have to know who you are and enter into the sacrament. Who you are, ready to lay down your life for your spouse, as Christ has laid down his life for his spouse. Oh, you know that Christ was married, right? What, Father? Well, Christ is married. Christ is the groom. The church is his bride. You and me. Unitive in the sense of the church. How many churches? One. The bridegroom lays down his life for the bride. Christ has done that. And so men and women who are called to the sacrament of matrimony have to understand that. That surrendering. That's the indissolubility. That's the surrender. So the unity, the oneness of marriage, the two become one, right? The unitive nature of marriage is very important to understand. One man and one woman. Not two men, not two women. One man and one woman. Indissoluble, until death do us part. That indissoluble means of a total laying down of one's life for the other. And Jesus shows that to us on the cross by the self-sacrificial gift that a man and woman have to have for one another. That's why they have to look at Christ's marriage. Christ was married to the church, and so it has to always be seen in that aspect. Indissoluble. And then it has to be procreative. The conjugal act must be always open for life. Now you may say, we can't afford like 15 children. I understand that. But the conjugal act is more than just physical. The conjugal act, or the act of making love, is more than just physical. There's a spiritual dimension to the conjugal act. It's a very holy, creative act, designed by the Creator. That men and women, and only men and women, reflecting God in its creative nature, allows life to happen. And he extends this between a man and a woman. And what a beautiful act that is. What a holy act that is. What a surrendering of complete love that is to the other. That's important to know these ends of marriage, or the spiritual goods. Unitive, indissoluble, procreative. Would you remember those three spiritual goods of marriage, please, in the back of your head? I don't know if we talk about that enough. And when people come for an interview to be married in the church within the context of the sacrament, do they understand that? Maybe at a tender young age, not so much. So little by little, we try to educate people into this beautiful, beautiful act and gift we call holy matrimony. So I'm going to be going through a series with you, taking the sacrament of marriage, and then just, talking about it over several weeks, or maybe several days, but I think more than several days. I'm just talking about the theology now. John Paul II did a beautiful, beautiful expose and course called the Theology of the Body. How do we attain salvation? Through the body. How are you going to get to heaven? The graces of the sacrament come through the body. If you're called to be a married person, that's the way of life to get to heaven. So here's the road going to heaven for all the married couples. Here's the road going to heaven to all the single people. Here's the road to going to heaven to all the priests, religious, deacons. The vocational way of life, it's a different road because it has different responsibilities, different signposts. But we're called to take that road because that's the way for salvation that God has planned for us. I'm not taking the road to heaven that is for married couples. That's for them. But our destiny is the same, right? So tomorrow, I'll continue this, okay? So I want to get in your head, unitive, indissoluble, procreative. The spiritual goods of marriage. Very important. Very important. The theology of the body. And all of those aspects of marriage are not just a physical aspect, they're spiritual as well. Okay? Have a blessed day, everybody. Enjoy your day. Happy St. James Day, Christmas in July.